The Honorable Karen Eileen Howze is here with us, Magistrate Judge of the Superior Court of the District of Columbia. And to give you a little bit of information on Judge Howze, she was appointed Magistrate Judge by Chief Judge Rufus G. King III on September 12, 2002. Judge Howze was born and reared in Detroit, Michigan by her mother, who was a school teacher, and her father, who was a skilled tradesman with Ford Motor Company, Incorporated. Judge Howze is a 1972 graduate of the University of Southern California, where she received a Bachelor of Science degree in journalism. She graduated from Hastings College of Law in San Francisco in 1977. Judge Howze was a reporter and editor with newspapers in San Francisco, Long Island, Rochester, New York, and Detroit, and Washington, D.C., in a career that spanned 19 years. In 1981, she was tapped to be one of the 8 founding editors of USA Today, and in 1989 became a news executive with Gannett Company Incorporated. After leaving Gannett in 1991, Judge Howze launched her law practice in a media consulting firm that focused on media diversity issues and the training of journalists throughout the world to include all members of the community in news coverage. Judge Howze focused her law practice on advocacy for children and people with disabilities, adoption, and the protection of the elderly. At the same time, she developed a consulting practice that focused on media diversity issues and the training of journalists throughout the world to include all members of the community in news coverage and EEO investigations. From 2000 to 2001, Judge Howze served as Special Master in the Family Division, D.C. Superior Court, to develop strategies for the implementation of the Adoption and Safe Families Act. In addition, Judge Howze served as a consultant on diversity issues to the newspaper industry and conducted EEO investigations as a contractor and investigator. There's more. Between 2000 and 2002, Judge Howze was a staff member specializing in adolescent health issues at the American Bar Association Center on Children in the Law, where she was the principal writer and editor of Health for Teens in Care, a Judge's Guide. Judge Howze is also the author of Making Differences Work, Cultural Context and Abuse and Neglect Practice, which was published by the American Bar Association Center on Children in the Law in 1996. And I think this is another very, very important thing, that Judge Howze is an adoptive mother of 3 adult daughters. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Judge Howze.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been excited about this ever since Ingrid emailed me about participating. I think this institute is a wonderful, wonderful thing. The program title was related to culture and adoption in the courts. But I'm sort of changing that a little bit, though I'm coming from the court perspective. I decided that what we should really spend our time today doing is talking about and working on this issue of disproportionality and how that works in with what the court is doing as well as what you all do in the adoption arena. So I'm using the title of the book that I did in 1996. I still do consulting work around that publication, and we're going to talk about making differences work. Okay, you all have been, I can tell from the age of the group, that you all have been probably grappling with this issue of disproportionality within your own jurisdictions. And we know that the issue has really been, I'm also not good at hand-eye coordination and making things work on this machine. Okay. Nope. We are not in the right place. Oh, you know, I'm just going to forget that. Would that be okay? Because that'll just make my ADHD self just be totally gone. So you have it in front of you. So, perfect. Okay, disproportionality really started to be a topic of discussion about 1972. Not just in the child welfare arena, but also juvenile justice. What we know is that in 2000, there were 812,599 children in the child welfare system. even though African American children are only 16% of the population, the percentage of their representation in the child welfare system was 36.5%. Hispanics at that time, 16% of the population, representation was about 13-14%. Over the years, their representation in the system has also begun to go up, has also gone up. There were 3 national incidence studies of child abuse and neglect conducted by the Department of Health and Human Services from 1980 to 1996. And those studies found that there were no differences in the incidence of child abuse and neglect according to racial group. In other words, your race doesn't have anything to do with whether you end up in the system. There are also a few other facts. The overrepresentation of minorities in child welfare discussion found that social workers often identify race. The line social workers identify race as a significant factor in whether a child should be removed after the child was reunified with the parent. Now, all of this is coming out since 1972. We're now at 2008. Okay, 5 major studies in 4 states between 1990 and 1999 revealed that white children were 4 times more likely than African American children to be reunified. Okay, that affects what we're doing in adoption. White children were reunified more quickly, so we have children staying in care longer, which we all know, you all know better than I, has a great negative impact on children and their development. Now, of those requiring substitute care or foster care, 56% of the African American children were placed in foster care, while 72% of white children received in-home services to prevent their removal. African American children remain in foster care longer than white children, as I said before. In 2004, the Center for Social Policy found that states vary considerably in degree of overrepresentation of minorities. Now, they didn't go into what groups in what state, but they did define the states based on the degree of disproportionality, either moderate, high, or extreme. Now, where do your states stand? Who's here from Alaska and Florida? Okay. Alaska, Florida. You guys are moderate. Okay? Now, quite frankly, I don't know what moderate means, but Connecticut and Ohio. Okay? Ohio? No? You're Ohio? Connecticut? Oh, they left? Well, they're high. Now let's talk about who's extreme. Arizona. I guess it's the rest of the people in the room, huh? Arizona, Minnesota, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Okay. Now, I don't think that this is you all's fault. Okay. So there's no embarrassment. But it does say we really have a lot of work that needs to be done to not just figure out, okay, well, we don't bring the children in, because that's not the point. But what is it that we're doing, and is it facilitating the primary purpose of the Adoption Safe Families Act, which is to make sure that children are safe, that they have all of their needs met, and that they quickly move to permanency that really is going to be a permanent situation. Okay. It's interesting, in July of 2007, the General Accounting Office actually did one of their periodic reports on issues of the nation. They did one on African American children and disproportionality. And what they found that I found most interesting, the report's not very long, it doesn't have a lot of numbers, but they did say 2 things that I'd like to present to you today. That bias or cultural misunderstanding on the part of caseworkers is a critical factor in disproportionality. And then they said something else. Juvenile and family court judges contribute to disproportionality. This is the first time in what I've been dealing with this stuff since the mid-'80s that I actually have seen some place where we're talking about the whole system as opposed to pointing fingers in different directions. So I commend you to take a look at that GAO report, because there may be some other significant things in there that will start discussion back home where you come from. Now, what the GAO did, they did a survey of 21 states. And so these conclusions come from the responses that the state directors provided to them in their survey. I don't know what their instrument was. I don't know what questions they asked. But I do find it interesting that these two conclusions have come forward. So what do? Okay, my premise is the Adoption Safe Families Act, which is the law of the land, and actually is the first time in this country that somebody was made ultimately responsible for the safety, well-being of children. And who is that? Who is responsible? Huh? Don't be shy. Who? What entity? The court. That is the big change, aside from all the time frames and all of that, and what the state agencies have to do. The big change was the court is driving the bus. Okay? So that's where the GAO's comment becomes even more serious. Okay? But again, the Adoption Safe Families Act says the court may be driving the bus because that's the ultimate monitor, but every step of the way, everyone has a responsibility. And that responsibility is not just with the Child Welfare Agency, because we've got well-being factors, right? So that means education, health, all of those executive branch agencies are supposed to be working together, marching this child to permanency and safety, correct? And all it is, the judge is supposed to be standing there making sure everybody's working together to get to that end in a timely fashion. So we can agree on that, because there could be some argument in some circles about this. But I think we have to have that central agreement if we're going to move forward with discussing where do we go from here. Okay, 1972 to 2008, to recognize that there's disproportionality and not see it change is really a terrible, terrible thing. There are lots of people, Westat does their studies, people are talking about what is it systemically. I believe that it's a matter of the people who are doing the work, and that's everyone down the road. So what I'd like to do today is sort of go through some exercises about sort of my theory about how you make differences work that does impact on the care and permanency that children receive when they happen to be touched by this system. Okay. The Adoption Safe Families Act, besides setting some parameters of responsibility, also requires that, and I think it's very clear, that we're not supposed to be doing cookie-cutter things anymore. A kid comes into care, so what we're going to do is, okay, you got to have parent training, and this is on every case plan, parent training and drug testing, and we're supposed to be identifying the specific needs of each child and each family. Correct? We have agreement on that. Okay? We've got new risk assessment tools now that were developed because of this change in our operating system. The court is supposed to be asking at every stage, what about X? On all those factors, education, health, how's the mom doing? Pushing people along, more frequent hearings, supposedly, okay? All of that is designed to hit the specific needs of the family. Well, how do you know what they are if we're looking at the family, the child, through lenses that are colored by who we are, okay? Now, I remember in the 70s, they used to talk about this sensitivity training, and see, I don't believe in that, because I don't think that us doing our jobs is about people becoming sensitive. It really is figuring out a mechanism to put aside who you are, okay, so that you can do what needs to be done for those people we're supposed to be serving. And I don't think that's that difficult. So today we're going to try to go through, in this brief period of time that we have, some ways that you can begin developing for yourself, if you don't have it already, because I'm not going to make any assumptions, but also how you can work with the people who work for you to get them to begin asking questions to get different results. Is everybody with me? You're all right with this? Okay. Cultural and subcultural context is the intersection. This is my definition. I made it up. Okay? It's the intersection of culture and something called subculture with the application of the law. It's the intersection of culture and subculture with the application of the law. And in this context, we're talking about abuse and neglect law. But it could apply to domestic violence. It could apply to juvenile delinquency, okay? Or even criminal law, actually, okay? As attorneys, judges, and social workers work to rebuild families in abuse and neglect cases, the reality is clear. Cultural and subcultural context does not shape the law, okay? If you've abused somebody, the law gives the definition of what abuse is. There is no room in there for us to talk about, oh, well, this person was from Cambodia and there are certain religious practices. No, we in this society have certain parameters that we use to define what abuse is. And having a cultural piece that says, okay, I rub coins for health reasons on the back of a child to clear out fevers, and that leaves blisters, okay? That does not excuse, under the law, that this is abuse in this society, okay? Now, I'm not saying it is, but somebody has to apply that law that defines abuse to this circumstance. What I believe is the law is colorblind. The law itself is colorblind. The law itself does not deal with people's economic differences. It's us as we move through the process of applying the law that creates these difficulties and that don't need to be there, okay? Now, what do we need to do to begin changing our framework? We have to define the levels and types of services needed by each child and family. We have to anticipate the impact of such services on the outcome of each case. And at the same time, we have to recognize that as we're doing that, our differences are going to begin to show up. And we have to acknowledge them and figure out how to still meet the needs of that family. And that really is a tall order because we're moving so fast, you don't even realize it's jumping out there until it's already been there, right? The damage may have already been done. Let me give you a couple of examples. I remember when I first started practicing law in abuse and neglect in the early 90s, I inherited a client who was HIV positive. This is a mother. I represented the mom. HIV positive, long-term heroin addict, had been on methadone, still using all kind of drugs. She had 2 little girls in care. She was in bad shape. She signed what we call a consent agreement at the time the case first was petitioned. I got the case during the review process when they were trying to figure out whether the kids could go back home. She signed this agreement a year before I started representing her. So I'm going through the file. I see this. I look at the agreement one day, and the agreement has somebody else's name in it, somebody else's case facts in it. Okay? Now, she had an attorney. All right? She signed a document. What did that say to me? I didn't say, oh, somebody messed up. Okay? What I said was, I need to suspect that this woman can't read. Okay? Now, what did I do? First of all, I could have probably done something to overturn it, but that wouldn't have served any purpose. I had to decide, do I confront her about not being able to read, or do I figure out another way to finesse this? And this is really sort of the beginning lesson. If I had, now I'm new to her. I just met her one time, and she was one cold, hard woman, okay? If I had said, I don't think you know how to read, okay? What would have been reaction? I would never have established a relationship with her. But also, she had been fighting for a year and a half about the reality that she was required to get what? A GED to get her children back. Now, that had been a year, right? So I'm trying to figure out, how do I approach her, okay? And you know what? To the day she died, she never knew that I knew she didn't know how to read until she told me I don't know how to read. Because I just told her, here's what we're going to do. I do this with all my clients. And this is what we're talking about. What we have to do every time there's a piece of paper, you just tell the people, I want my lawyer here. Okay? And wherever I am, I will get in touch with those people. And that meant that changed case planning. That simple thing, because she had somebody there. Okay? Now, this isn't the social worker, except for that year, the social worker should have figured out a way to know she couldn't read. She had a year of anger behind having to get a GED, which then required her to reveal something that to her was what? A subcultural context. Despite all the other stuff she's going through, that had some value to her, okay? And it got in the way of case resolution, okay? Does this make sense to you all? Okay. Now, each case, like her name was Bonnie, each case like this has a child who is unique, a parent who is unique, permanent families who are coming forward who are unique, and they cannot be dealt with just as though they're the kind of marching herd through the child welfare system. If they are dealt with that way, then what we have is what? Longer waits and the disproportionality that we're talking about. Okay? So, what is cultural and subcultural context? First of all, it involves more than race and ethnicity. Okay? So, what are some of the other areas that you might toss out would be things to be considered cultural and subcultural areas? Anybody? Go ahead. Economics, religion or faith. What else? It may be the physical location, depending on the locality. Yeah, because here in D.C., I don't know how many of you are familiar with D.C., but where do all the kids get removed from? Southeast, on the other side of the river. And everybody's got another side of the river or another side of the railroad tracks, right? Okay? That in itself is an area that has its own culture. Okay? Anybody else? What about disabilities? Literacy. Okay? Now, they break down into, cultural is one thing, and that does have some kind of definition. A lot of the things are in the subcultural arena. Age, immigration status. That brings up what? Language. Okay? All right? Example. There's a family, Vietnamese family in D.C., that we went, the kids were removed. One day, we finally found Vietnamese-speaking therapists. This took a long time. The person was in Virginia, but we were able to engage. The agency paid for it. Okay. It was long into the time that we were kind of getting close to the deadlines, but this therapist came in. She was the first one to say that the father, who grew up in Vietnam, okay, wife was Vietnamese, father's Vietnamese by citizenship, but he was Chinese by ethnic origin. And think about it. Does that one fact change some things? Okay? You got 3 kids, step kid, 2 biological with mom and dad, 1 who was from another relationship. Is there something going on there between the kids because this father is ethnic Chinese versus Vietnamese? I don't know the answers, but what is it? Somebody should ask some questions about whether that is something that we need to discuss in terms of service delivery. Luckily, we had an expert who was providing services that could help with that question. But if you don't ask that question, what happens? You're working on the wrong dynamic, aren't you? Okay? Does this make sense? Okay. All right. So, our first lesson. Learning a few generalizations about the characteristics of African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, Native Americans, or the poor does not meet the requirements for working within cultural and subcultural contexts. We have to create a balance between the context that is cultural, and compliance with the law, beginning with the recognition of the following principles. Each child and family is unique. I'm going to keep repeating this. Each family is different in key aspects of family life. So that's when you're starting to drill down even further than the surface, okay? The solutions needed to repair the family and to successfully move toward permanency must be based on a clear and careful examination of that family uniqueness and family differences without using our personal cultural context as a prism for our decision making. Now that's social workers, doctors, judges, lawyers. It's the whole ball of wax, okay? Now, at your tables, what I'd like you to do is take a couple minutes, since we've talked about what's cultural and what's subcultural, and just sort of define to each other what is your cultural and subcultural context as an individual. So I'm going to tell you about my cultural and subcultural context, all right? All right, I'm from Detroit. I'm single. I'm a parent. I have disabled kids. I'm African American. I guess, well, I'm Catholic because once Catholic, always Catholic. I used to be a Polish nun. And I think that's it. Now, the reason for this exercise is everybody has something that would make people go, oh, that's interesting. And when you get those, it's sort of, and I wonder how that affected X, Y, and Z. Okay? All right? No difference with the people we're working with, right? You experienced that a little bit at your tables. You've been working together for 3 days? And maybe somebody said something that, I wouldn't have expected that from that person. Now, it would be a longer process if we did this with 10, 15 minutes. But you think about it. The people who work with you, you never do that kind of exercise, right? And yet at the same time, with that exercise, you get a tough case like the one that I told you about with the Vietnamese family, okay? There might be a black person who lived in a community that was Vietnamese, who's a social worker, and if you knew that, okay, then that would be the go-to person to ask this question, not as an expert, but because they had life experiences that may help in the planning and development of a plan for this particular family. Does this make sense? Okay, so one thing that's necessary is we've got to figure out ways to have these kinds of discussions with the people who work for us. Because then you learn what personal capacity people have. It has nothing to do with education. But it also helps people to see if I have a weakness in my thinking about, for example, my colleagues, we had actually the family court, which I am not on anymore, had their annual interdisciplinary training, and the topic was disproportionality in the juvenile delinquency arena with black boys, okay? One of the breakouts, apparently, there was a discussion. This is an enlightened colleague, one of my best friends, okay? She says, well, a cultural context, they were talking about cultural context, and she said, it is better for children to grow up in two-family homes. That's problematic. Okay? Not from she's not a religious person. I would never have thought she would have said this. Okay? We have lots of conversations, but we don't talk about that stuff. Now, why is it important to talk about it? Because if I see a situation, because I am a right-thinking person, these are things that don't make you bad people. I am a right-thinking person, and I know what that little blinding thing is that's popping out about preference for two-family, it's better to be in a two-parent family, okay? Then what can I do? When it pops out, I can check it, but I also can go talk to somebody else who may have a different perspective. Again, because we can't say there are rights or wrongs. It depends on what the child needs, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. Not, I believe it's better to have a functional mother and father. Am I clear here? I get really excited about this when people get it. Okay, so how would you say, and we can do this together, how would you say that the context, your context, affects you on a daily basis at work? No, out loud now.
Oh, okay. One of the things for me was that one of my subcontext things was that I was a teen parent.
Okay.
And so whenever I have my staff, even when they're talking about birth families, and when they're talking, there's no baby daddy, I hate that term, just period. But when they start that kind of conversation, because they don't think that it can go anywhere else, because she's a single mom, she's a teen mom, that she can't do anything. She can't make her life better. She can't overcome some of the situations and conditions she's in. So I think that having experienced that, one helps staff to be able to understand that that's a myth that they need to be able to break. But then it also helps that birth parent to be able to understand that their condition is not one that they have to stay under, that it's a choice that they can make in order to overcome that situation.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead.
I know that sometimes there's an issue with the foster homes and the biases that some of the workers have, and we have to remind them that this is not your home. Either it's a foster home or a biological home. This is not your home, but as soon as you take that child out of that home and what they know, then you've destroyed a life. Because what we run into sometimes, we'll get new workers or fresh out of school, and they'll say, I walked into our home and I wouldn't live there. Well, you don't have to. That's that. As long as they have the essentials to live, and there's not holes in the floors, and there's not, things crawling everywhere, the children are fed and clothed well, and they appear happy, then that child should remain in that home. You don't have to live there.
Now, where do you come to that perspective? How do you come to that perspective, you personally?
It's some, me being me is difficult because I wasn't, my home wasn't top 9 at all times when I was coming up. So when they say things like that, I begin to take it personal, and then I pull them to the side and help them to realize that just because you wouldn't live there doesn't mean that that child doesn't belong there.
Okay.
And then just having that one-on-one conversation with them, and it's uneasy. And I was so glad yesterday when Mr. Mason talked about uneasy conversations between colleagues, but they need to happen. I was so glad he talked about that yesterday, because I find myself being that person. Like, Tiffany will tell her what to say, and she'll go and tell her. She'll tell her nice, but they'll get the point. And I think that needs to happen more, that more people need to have those conversations with other people as well. So.
Okay. All right. Somebody else? Okay, let me give you a example. I liked your talking about the clean house. I am a fastidious person in terms of my house. It's not necessarily dust-free, but I don't like a lot of junk, okay? But every now and then, after I got 3 kids, and they busted holes in my walls and set fires and did all kind of stuff, the house just sort of went by the wayside to keep up with them, okay? So when I hear a clean house story, it gets kind of personal, because they might have come and taken my kids because somebody was, even at my own standard, that's my point. Your standards and things change over time, even in this cultural arena, okay? But also, we should be able to come up with a way that we're not responding to these things based on our own emotional, personal, because then we miss stuff. And we miss the opportunity to really effectively help people do their jobs better, okay? So that's what we're going to talk about now, because it isn't you identifying it, because yours was a personal, so you're riding upstream, because it's always personal, okay? I think, though, that there's a way for us to develop practices that require us to methodically question what we're doing based on the needs of the family, so that our personal doesn't have to come out there unless it's necessary to move it forward. Does that make any sense? Because everybody's not going to be comfortable talking about what it is that is uncomfortable to them. Okay? And we can't expect everybody to do that. You can't expect your workers to do it. There could be ramifications for them saying certain things. Okay? But as supervisors and directors, we can develop methods in our work at every stage that will help us get to where we want to go without anybody being damaged, including the people we serve. Okay, so how do you do that? First of all, we have to do a little bit of, personally, what we've kind of touched on here, which is we have to really do some thinking about our own assumptions and perceptions. Okay? And that's not to make us feel bad. It's to know what they are, so then you can begin to put them aside as the occasions require. Okay? I'll give you an example. I grew up in the 50s and 60s in Detroit, and on every corner, these people didn't live in our community, okay? But on every corner, every few blocks, there was a corner store. Sort of like the 7-Elevens now, but they were just corner stores owned by small shop people. And you know who owned all those stores? Tell me who owned them. Jewish people. This is the 50s, okay? All right? And you could walk to the store. That was where we went to get, in between the grocery, you went to the corner store. Some of the folks were nice, some of them weren't, okay? But you would hear these nasty comments about Jews, they'll steal you for a penny. I could hear some of this stuff, even still in my head, okay? Well, I knew, because of who I grew up with, that you can't speak that way of anyone. But think about it. That's your thing about what's in the community, okay? Because if you're walking from that store down the street to get back home after buying a loaf of bread, okay, or your mother says, yeah, that bread is 5 days old. See, they did it to us again. Then there's going to be a tape in your head that is not going to go away unless you consciously say, I'm going to keep that from coming out here, okay? But it's still in here. People have to work at it, okay? And you can't begin to work at that unless you sit back and understand what are your assumptions and your perceptions, and not beat yourself up about it. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. The other thing is we have to let the assumptions and perceptions give way to this questioning process that I'm suggesting, so that we can move forward with figuring out what the realities of those unique children and families, what are their realities. Because if you don't have a sense of your own, you're not going to get to the fact that a dirty house does not necessarily mean it's cluttered, and that I don't have to remove a child because the house is cluttered. There are some things that we could do. It may be problematic that it's cluttered. It may be moving in a direction saying that there's some illness going on here that is helping with this very serious physical situation in the home, but it doesn't necessarily mean I got to remove the kid. See, that's the disproportionality issue. You see where I'm going? Okay? Now, the other piece of this is we have to be very knowledgeable about what the community resources are, okay, that don't have anything to do with child welfare paying for something, okay, or the state paying for something, and how those families and children make use of those resources. Because, see, they're going to be different depending on who you are, where you come from, okay? Now, we have to also figure out ways in this questioning process to maximize the participation of the children and the families in the rehabilitation process, which I think has an impact on how long children stay in care, okay? And it is affected by our failure to look at the cultural context, subcultural context. All right, so first thing we do, is start questioning. And the goal of the questioning process is to really figure out who this child and this family is. Okay? So, what are the areas that we should be looking at? Cultural and subcultural context, race, ethnicity. Those are the key cultural areas. Okay? Subcultural, you said economics, religion. Religion can also be a cultural issue, correct? Mental health status, what is that? Is that in this mix? The only thing that we deal with on a daily basis that I don't believe is part of cultural and subcultural context is substance abuse. But I think in somebody's situation, almost any of the social indicators of people's lives are included there. Substance abuse is a different issue. It may factor into mental illness and other disabilities. But cognitive impairment, how many cases do you know in your career where it was to the end that nobody had figured out that mom may have been mildly mentally retarded? Because we have a perception, right, of what a mildly mentally retarded person does and how they function. But there's some very highly functional, adapted, mildly mentally retarded persons. Okay? They could sit in this room and follow everything we're talking about. But they don't have maybe adaptive skills, okay? But if you don't know what the person's cognitive level is, how do you then begin to provide services? Does this make sense? Have you all experienced that? Where you get so far down the line and then you realize, oh, mom may have a brain disorder. But she appears to be okay. Because what? Social workers may not know how to talk to a person that is cognitively impaired and maybe does not look like them. Okay, what if you've got a Vietnamese mom who has a brain disorder? Okay? And here's a social worker who's African American, or a judge who's African American, and I'm just assuming, because she's got a language, we've got a language issue, though she speaks a little English, but I'm going to lay it on the language instead of, wait, something else is going on. You see, now, how do you suppose we find out whether those pieces exist? Some of it is just looking at people. Some of it is just looking people in the eye and seeing there's a quirk here. Not something negative, but just, she's not really picking it up. If she's not picking it up, I can't make an assumption it's because she doesn't speak good English. I have to assume, okay, I'm the judge, right? All right, social worker, here's what do we need to do to figure out how to get what mom needs so she can be reunified? Okay? What do we need to do? Are there issues? And this is what I have to do as a judge. Some judges don't do that, and some social workers don't like it when judges do it. But you have to be able to lead that charge. And it isn't saying that the social worker doesn't know their job. It's saying, I'm sitting here, up here. You're down there. You've been hassling with these people all this time. Here's what I'm seeing. I can even see the disconnect between the person and the social worker in the courtroom. If I am paying attention and asking questions. You guys, as directors, supervisors, you can do the same thing. Observe the client with the social worker. Doesn't make the social worker a bad social worker. It's just something's not connecting right. You've experienced that, correct? Okay? And it's not a question of performance. It's this human stuff that is about people's context that's not laid out there. That's not what is part of our process. And maybe shouldn't be. But somebody's got to be looking and saying, okay, I need to ask some different questions here. Okay? So, let's talk about some real cases. You have a second packet that has case scenarios. Okay, let's go and take a look at James. I'm also not good at stapling things together. I think it's like it's the first case. All right, James is a 5-year-old African-American boy. His mother allegedly beat him with a belt, leaving marks on his back and legs. The child was removed and placed in the home of an unrelated foster parent in a rural community about 50 miles from home. The guardian ad litem has not met with the child. This is the initial hearing, the first presentment. However, the maternal grandmother tells the guardian ad litem that James has special physical and emotional needs. The grandmother, who is disabled, is unable to care for James. The plan presented is 14 months. The birth mother must be drug-free and secure a GED. That's the whole case plan. Okay? What are the cultural and subcultural context issues in this case? Not what's wrong, but what are the cultural pieces and the subcultural pieces you see in James? Okay, he's moved from urban to rural. Okay? So that's a context for this boy. Okay? Go ahead.
It says that he has special physical and emotional needs. There's no mention that in this rural community that those needs can be met at all.
Okay. In fact, we don't really know from this what the needs are.
No.
So we
Right.
can't then get to the question of whether that community, that placement, is going to meet his needs.
Right.
Right? Okay. Anything else?
Along those lines, then, you have a grandmother who's disabled or their services that can help her in supporting her grandson.
Right. Now, how many of you at early cases have experienced that nobody's asking anything about this, right? But guess what happens at the initial hearing? He's moved 50 miles. It's hard to undo it after it has been done, and his needs are going to be exacerbated because he was moved. And what do we have? Disproportionality. There was another series of options that could have come up if the questions were asked. Okay? Again, no right or wrong. It's about what questions get asked in the investigative stage of the case. Go ahead.
It makes me concerned about the visitation plan. The visitation plan for this child, 50 miles away, grandmother can't visit. And what's the likelihood that the birth mother can visit that far away either? It doesn't talk about how that's going to be availed, for this child's best interest. Nor does it talk anything about the paternal side of the family that might have been considered as a resource for this child.
Okay.
Just because grandmother wasn't a viable resource under these set of circumstances doesn't mean that there weren't other familial resources that should have or could have been looked at.
Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead.
I was speak to the fact that there's no mention of the father.
Okay.
I'm not seeing how drug-free and a GED relates to beating her
Remember
child.
what I said in the beginning. It was cookie cutter case plans, and I will tell you, there's still cookie cutter case plans, okay? This is where, from where you guys are, this is where you all can impact the process by using this questioning process from the minute the investigation starts. I know you're not in that arena, but you're agencies, okay? And I'm looking at it and saying, now what happens to James 14 months down the road? And maybe you can even ask it this way without even going into these cultural and subcultural and all of that. If the plan is 14 months, what is going to happen to James between today and 14 months, okay, that will ensure that he will go home to mom? Forget mom's problems. What do we need to do for him? That's putting him first, and it forces you to look at who he is. And that's the question that leads to what is the context. Does that make sense? Go ahead.
If the guardian ad litem had met with mom prior to, I think that he or she would have been able to advocate more for what those special needs are or who can take care of the child in the family. But he or she didn't meet prior to.
Well, she wouldn't have, because this was the initial hearing.
Oh, this
So
is
this is the
okay.
initial
Got it.
hearing. So all she's been able to do is find family members to talk to, okay? And usually a guardian ad litem, anyone worth their salt, is going to do that before necessarily introducing themselves to a child, so that they can get I'm hoping, get a context of who the child is, especially a 5-year-old.
At any point, would one of the questions, at any point, would one of the questions be, I'm just making an assumption because we know we state that James is a 5-year-old African-American boy, but we don't mention the race of the family that's 50 miles away in a rural community. And so I'm making an assumption, but is that a question that we need to be able to discuss or ask also, especially during this 14 months and the cultural differences that may also be taking place on that level too?
Okay. What do you all think about that? Okay.
How are his cultural needs met? That's a different.
That's what I'm asking. Is that a question that we need to be talking
How
about?
are his cultural needs met?
Okay, but see, everybody's scared of MIPA.
Right.
And it doesn't have anything to do with this.
Right.
I think that's your point, okay? I mean, the reality is that, and you all know this, again, I learned this from people in your profession. A child leaves this age, leaves their home, goes to some place that has different smells, different colors, people who look different, people who talk different. Again, it does not, different food, it doesn't mean the placement shouldn't happen. What it says is, I've got to, social worker, I've got to go to this foster parent and say, this is what we know about the context of this child. We know he or she needs to be comfortable. His favorite food is, not make the foster parent find out by asking the child who's traumatized, but what? The social worker knows, maybe even bring some to the house, okay? That's what this is about the child now, okay? Now, so, that's that person is at the center. But then you start drilling down on this example, and yeah, you got grandma. What services could be provided to her before we snatch them out just because she's in a wheelchair, okay? The reality of the 14-month plan. Maybe it's going to take longer. Okay, what about other relatives? Okay, what about visitation? Is there somebody the kid can go to on the weekends, even if he has to be 50 miles away? And who's going to drive them? Who drives them may be an important cultural and subcultural coming when you say he's got to be placed with a white family. Okay, that's our assumption. But maybe who drives him back and forth? There's a cultural, subcultural thing that needs to be included in that. Maybe it's as simple as certain kind of music. Okay? All right? Do you see, okay, because it's about keeping this child as comfortable as possible in the worst situation. But it's also about something else. Because in that case, 14 months, we can look at it and say, this ain't going to work. So we've set something in motion, okay? But then the 14 months is going to go into 24 months, is going to go into something else. So now what have we done? We busted out ASFA, right? And we've exacerbated the condition. We've actually probably made the child's condition worse. And all we had to do was ask some questions to minimize it. Not necessarily eliminate it, but just to minimize it a little bit. Is everybody with me? Go ahead.
I was going to make comments about school. You've got a child who is 5, has special physical and emotional needs. Have those been assessed? Is he getting early childhood services? Has he begun school? And you've now moved school districts very likely. And so then for this child to go back, then that would be another disruption in school. And our kids are frequently behind in age for grade.
Right. Yes.
Back in my foster care days, I can remember once when the county had removed a newborn from the hospital because the newborn had tested positive. And in the foster care, that's all we were told at that point was that the baby had tested positive, and so we placed them in a home. And so as
this is positive for drugs?
That's all they said was she tested positive. So that was our assumption was drugs. So and they had the visits, and they were only a newborn. You should have more than that regulatory 2 visits a month for an hour. But as we were trying to investigate, and the mother kept saying, I know that I was not using. I know that I was using. She had a history of using, but had sworn that when she found out she was pregnant, she had stopped. And so when we got the birth records finally from the hospital, the baby had tested positive for caffeine. And so I was trying to educate my staff so they could educate the caseworker and then hopefully the courts that if you've never been, I think every worker needs to go to an NA or an AA meeting. That's all they do is smoke cigarettes and drink coffee.
Right.
And so she was true to her word that she had stopped. But that's when that poverty thing comes in as well. And we fought for reunification for 6 months before that baby was returned to the birth mother.
And this is an example of, this is why I'm tying this to disproportionality, okay? This is an example, if the right questions had been asked, simply look at the medical records, okay? If the right questions had been asked, the child might not have even been removed, right? Okay, so that's 6 months in that infant's life that now we have affected, okay? All right, that's a good example. Let's go to Joseph, the next page. Okay, Joseph is a 15-year-old Vietnamese youth who resides with his mother, father, and 2 siblings, 5 and 9, in a community that is primarily African American. Joseph called the authorities to ask that he and his siblings be removed because the family was facing eviction after numerous facings of eviction, and he alleged that his parents used drugs. Neglect was found. Let me tell you a little bit about Joseph. If you met Joseph and you closed your eyes, you'd think he was a black kid with the pants drooped down off his backside. Okay? And he's the stepson of the Vietnamese citizen who is really Chinese by origin. His mom is Vietnamese. His mom and stepdad are the birth parents of the other 2. Mom speaks English. Dad does not speak any English at all. He only speaks Vietnamese. Okay, so with that added, that wasn't Joseph's father is Vietnamese, but we don't know where Joseph's father is. Okay? So just from the first part, what do you see as, plus what I've added, the cultural and subcultural issues here? We got a Vietnamese little brother. I like that. Well, we've got a Vietnamese teenager. Remember, somebody said age over here when we were talking, okay? Who culturally is identifying with another group, okay? I mean, to the point that, oh no, he is. I mean, he'd come in and he'd say stuff and I'd have to say, oh man, you did not say that, okay? Plan is reunification, okay? Go ahead.
Can we talk a little bit more about the removal? Because I'm not really seeing the removal here. You've got a 15-year-old making an allegation.
It was supported. There were lots of other things. There was drug use. There was eviction. I mean, they were going to be out on the street. Okay. There were allegations that were supported of abuse of Joseph. Okay. So assume that in this case the removal was a good thing. Okay. So now we're past trial. Everything has been resolved, and now we're in the review stage. Okay? 15-year-old, Vietnamese, what other cultural, subcultural issues do you see just in that first part?
Blended family.
Okay. All right. Blended family, that is what? It's not just blended family, it's complex. Right? What else? Go ahead.
You have a head of the household who doesn't speak English. And you have this young 15-year-old male assuming, even though he's reporting around safety issues, he's assuming, head of the household, I'm going to take care of the family's need, because my family's need is we need a place to stay. And so
I'm going to go take care of that.
Yes, right. So he's usurping or stepping in his stepfather's shoes, and his stepfather doesn't know how to access services to meet his family's needs.
Okay, and here's where I'd have to stop you, because the first part was okay, but the second part, it should not be a conclusion. It should be questions about. But see, that's what we're doing here.
It was a question for me.
Okay, that's what we're doing here.
But I would have wanted to ask Dad, well, did he really realize that the family was being evicted?
Oh, they have been evicted in the last 3 years. They've been evicted 3, 4, 5, 6 times.
Oh.
They were always. That's why the boy
knew to pick up the phone and intervene.
Okay. But I think you said what my experience is that most people see a parentified child, okay, and then jump immediately to it's the fault of this person, okay?
Well, I didn't think it was
No. I'm not saying you. I'm saying that's what I hear, okay? That nobody can say to me when I start asking questions, well, what's the situation with Dad? What things would you want to know in that circumstance? Now, Dad's subcultural thing may be related to employment, social economic, which, employment's not a cultural thing, but if you ain't got no money and you're getting evicted, okay, even if you're using drugs, for all I know, using the drugs was because they were getting evicted all the time. I mean, it's not just saying there's drugs here. What is it that is leading to this unique family to be functioning in this way, okay? And it does break down into these cultural and subcultural basis in terms of a place for us to start. So we're not starting globally and making assumptions and using perceptions that are going to affect the way we get to where we're trying to go. Go ahead.
I would ask some questions. I think we could ask some questions related to the Vietnamese culture of the parents, and also their length of time in the country, and with the children. I mean, we don't know. I don't know that all 3 of these children were born here, or
the 2 younger ones.
The 2 younger ones were born here. That whole coming to the U.S., what that was about, what their experience has been, and definitely, I mean, it sounds like Joseph has embraced the culture of the community around him. We don't know what that means with the parents. They may not be pleased with that. You certainly see where you have families from other countries here, and the children embrace the community and the values of American culture. The parents don't necessarily do that, and just how that plays into everything that's going on.
Right. And how that plays into what the plan is going to be.
Right.
Right? Because Joseph, we can assume at 15, he's already totally integrated. We don't have to look at all 3 of these kids and say they all are going to be reunified, okay? Because maybe it needs to be staged. Maybe Joseph doesn't want to be reunified, okay? And maybe he doesn't want to be reunified because there are some dynamics going on that actually we could step in and help this family get over, that they maybe would not be able to do it themselves. But again, this questioning process gets at least that on the table early on in the case.
What resources might be there to help with their, like Catholic Charities and other groups have refugee programs to assist folks, and what have the family been able to access in the way of those types of supports.
And the assumption, again, this also, which actually in this case played itself out, they did not, this is, I don't know your name back there, but next to you, Leo, Sharon, they did not have the wherewithal to find the community resource, okay? Mom did, and actually had been plugged in, okay? But Dad didn't, all right? He didn't speak the language, and he lived literally in this square from his job to the house because he didn't have the language, okay? We ended up with them going to the place Mom had been to and had not followed through on, a year, 2 years before, and the social worker therapist who worked with them had actually worked with the mom before the agency got involved. So this had been a long-standing problem, okay, that was multi-layered. But the bottom line is, what do we do with Joseph? Okay? We're trying to figure out how to get this going so the decisions can be made. Is he going to ever go back home? Go ahead.
One thing that I was going to say is I think when you have a caregiver child like that that has called in before, sometimes when the counselors go out there, the social worker already has a predisposed opinion of this child, and maybe a prior one there wasn't valid reasons, and I mean it's a subculture of kids that have come back through
right
over and over. There's already kind of a predetermined thought of whether this kid is reliable or not.
Right.
No matter what age.
And see, I think that gets to how we look at kids and look at what they're doing and what their needs are. Now, the bottom line is, think about it. This is a Vietnamese kid who thinks he's African American. You got an African American social worker who looks at this kid as he's doing this stuff that the regular teenagers are doing and trying to be gangster and all of that, okay? There was a disconnect between the social worker and the kid just because of that little dynamic. And quite seriously, this boy is loudmouthed, he gets on your nerves, but he's as sweet as can be, okay? He truly wanted the best for his family, okay? So now we've got the second part. For reunification to occur, the birth mother must secure housing, undergo drug treatment, and participate in individual and family therapy to address domestic violence between the parents. The disposition hearing sets a 6-month deadline for a reunification. The birth mother says she will kick her drug habit on her own. She's done it before. The birth father claims he does not have a drug habit. The birth father does not speak English, as we said. Birth mother does speak English. What do we have now? Now we're talking about mom.
Well, I wanted just to make a comment, if you don't mind, in that I missed part of the first part of this, so this may have already been said, but being that Joseph is the oldest male in this household, I think a lot, before you look at our lens of the parentified child, I think a lot of inquiry needs to be done in the Vietnamese community and culture and what that child's expectations are as the oldest son in that family.
And that's exactly it, because what we found out was he was responsible for the kids. Mom and dad were working 2 and 3 jobs. So he was, and that's why it made sense for him to call and say, we're getting put out. Okay? So is that parentified? I was waiting for this because that's exactly what ended up happening. That's exactly what ended up. But see, what did we do initially? I mean, we're kind of modeling this even in our discussion. I'm the one that said, oh, yeah, well, parentified children, they do X, Y, and Z. Okay? Well, do we know that that's what it is? Because I'm not a therapist. I'm not a social worker. I don't know what it means to be parentified. I just sort of assume certain things. Well, I bet a lot of social workers assume a lot of things. Right? Okay?
Let me just finish on that. So to expect that the birth mother secure housing is when Joseph, the oldest male in the family, who obviously has enculturated to the largest degree, in making that assumption, there would be some exploration that would have to happen. Perhaps that's not the birth mother's role in that family, is to secure housing. Perhaps Joseph, in order for that family to be successful, needs to be involved in that process.
So now we've got, first we started with the kid and whether the definition, no, it isn't that he would sign. He might be the one who had to go to the church that they were signed up at and they were involved, tell the church people, we're getting evicted, we need housing. Then mom signs on the dotted line, okay? But that's something that, why would you think that's a dynamic here? Unless what? You started asking questions, okay? Now, what was beginning to happen with this kid, which happens with teenagers, I guess, anyway, he was starting to say, I want to go do X, Y, and Z. I don't want to do this. Get somebody else to watch. He's acting like his buds, right? Okay, he's 15. But the other part of it was, when he was removed, the kids were originally put together. He was acting out so because he's in charge, okay? So he ended up in a group home, a very good group home. And now he's being taught that that's not his responsibility. And is that problematic? Because then what happens? You go back, he ain't never going home. We made it so he does not ever go home.
And from his culture, not just.
No, that's right. No, and I say home, I'm talking about the whole, it's not the house. It's what he defines as home. We're inflicting change in terms of his definition of who he is and what family is to him.
He can also struggle because he's been caring for his siblings so long, and you tell me I don't have to do it anymore. But if I don't do it anymore, who is going to do it? Who's going to look
And he articulated that.
Right. Who's going to look out for them? Because mom and stepdad were drugs, when they had domestic violence, so we've been evicted so many times, and it's my job to look after my siblings, no matter what that is. But now we separated. I was acting out because you're telling me I can't do it anymore, but I'm telling you it's my job. So then you move me and tell me, really, don't do it anymore. But who's going to do it?
Okay, and see that, again, that's where the social workers have to, once you ask the questions, then it's about how we intervene, okay? And maybe it is a good thing for him not to. He's doing very well. The other two went home. He can walk over after school anytime he wants. He is now 18, okay? He made a choice. He wanted alternate plan, permanent living arrangement. He wants to go to college. He works very hard at school. He's got 2 jobs. He helps contribute to the family, but he's not living there, and he's cool with it. But we didn't do it in a way that set up these barriers. We didn't do it all right, okay? I'm not saying that. But we were asking some of these questions as we walk through the process, okay? It's easy to ask all of them when we're sitting here. But we spent 6 months with the social workers talking about he was parentified. And until, see, I can't say it, I'm the judge. Until the social worker from the resettlement house started coming to court, even though she wasn't getting paid, okay, she could toss in little things that started getting people dealing with Joseph a bit differently, okay? But we should have been there from the beginning, okay? Go ahead.
One of the points is not just in asking the questions. It's not, asking the questions is really not the main point. The main point is, who do we ask the questions of? Because if you would have just said to Joseph, why are you acting like you're the man of the house? He would have just said, because I am. And then we would have thought that he was just another little smart little mouth guy. Yeah, you think you're the boss, but you're not the, but it's maybe going to that church to say what is the norm in this community. Right. Because I don't know. And I think the best thing when I don't know a culture is to say I don't know versus pretending to know it. You know where to go to. Those communities all have that mayor, that unspoken mayor of the neighborhood that you can kind of go to and get that kind of information. And see, that's what it means to know what your community resources are. It's not about services. Right. It's the real people who can help figure this out. Now, you said something that I really want to pick up on. You said sometimes it's who you ask the questions of. What we are talking about is, remember that example I gave about the woman with the HIV and the heroin, and I did not ask her that ultimate question? The questions I have to ask of myself. And then I, as a professional, in whatever role I have to figure out the sneaky Pete to get to where I feel comfortable that I have the answer to the question. Am I making any sense? It's a questioning process that you're really kind of making a list, checking it twice, checking myself, and ultimately it helps move the process forward.
Okay? Sometimes it is going to people and asking questions, but it isn't like we do now in a meeting. Okay, what does the family need? No, it really is somebody looks at that charging document and says, what do I have here? Not, what do I need to fix? First, what do I have here? That's the context of the people. Does that make sense? Okay.
So one of the things I've been struggling through all of this is we've got Dad who's not an English speaker, and how are his needs being addressed, and who is his voice piece, and concerns particularly with moms not being sober and using drugs, and maybe having, and domestic violence, quite for that matter, and that potential conflict of interest.
Now, nobody said, who's the domestic violencer? She was beating the crap out of him. He was beating the crap out of her son. That wasn't his. Okay? But the assumption is he was, right? Okay? Now, where did he go? He went to the same place she went, where she had a relationship with the therapist, because that's the only place that could be found that was, and he refused to go. Now here's, again, these questionings come up not one time, but every time you're having a case planning conference, every time you're having an administrative review, every time you're having a court hearing, it starts like peeling away the onion. It was a year into this where we're just trying to get this guy, why won't he go? Why won't he go? Okay? And then it was then that I realized that she had a relationship with the therapist, which had not come out before. Well, that's 101, isn't it? Why would he want to go to somebody that, okay? Yeah, okay. So ultimately, once we found somebody else, the counselor was female. Is that problematic? Again, a cultural context, okay? Now, I'm not making some assumptions and generalizations that, well, all Vietnamese men only want to deal with Vietnamese men when they're in these. No. But the question needed to be asked, would he be more comfortable with a male therapist? And even if the person wasn't Vietnamese, would he be comfortable if we arrange what? Interpreter services, okay? Or can we really see if we can find somebody and enlist this person from the resettlement house to help us find another therapist so that there's some distance between folks so that we can move forward, okay? If we hadn't, from hearing to hearing, been peeling away the onion, the two kids would never have gone back. If we hadn't realized they have no money, even though they're working, they're not doing anything bad with their money. D.C. is expensive to live. They live in D.C., okay? Well, you've got to live in a perfect place. No, he had a landlord, the father. And all this time, he's got a place to live. She had to move, okay? She had to move. So she lived in a basement in Virginia for a while she was working. But it helped her get time to build herself up, right? So Dad's got this little apartment. It's not big enough for two kids. And we know when the kids come back, Mom's going to move back, right? That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's not my business, okay? He had this little apartment. He had a relationship with the landlord with the assistance of the church guy who had been looking out for the kids, not under any contract with anybody, okay? That the landlord allowed them to build a wall to make a room for the little girl so that she wasn't sleeping with her brother. And they were reunified. Their mom moved back in. But they're not beating on each other anymore, okay? Now, that could have ended up where the two kids were adopted, okay? And that's what this is about. Now, it took longer than it would have without all of these complications, but I think we got somewhere in 2.5, 3 years that we wouldn't have gotten, and the outcome for the kids would have been worse. These are 3 very bright children that I don't think got affected because every time we did something, at least in the courtroom, we were asking questions. And they were pissed at me. They were teed off, the agency folks, because we're stretching the envelope when we're doing this, right? No, but I'm in charge of that. You know, as long as it's documented, Feds aren't going to say nothing.
So they were able to, they really gave the compelling reasons.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, boyfriend has decided he wants APLA, and that's documented. Okay? Appropriate counseling was held with him. Okay? And the two little kids were in a good foster home. She wanted to adopt them. Okay? And I'm telling you, it would have gone that way if Dad hadn't have gotten that wall built in the house. Do you understand what and it's happening all over, right? You all have had experience with that. You look at a file and you say, how did this get this far? Okay? And I don't think it's about social work. I think it's about our prisms and the way that we look at people. We see them as dysfunctional when they're really not. Okay? We see them as needing more than the system has to give them. And we don't figure out who they are so that they can tell us how they want to progress to get their families back. Go ahead.
I think that there's a tendency to view clients in a simplistic way or in a unidimensional way. Mm-hmm. And so we tend to label our clients as, a one-dimensional, and usually that's in a negative way based on whatever issue brings them to the attention of the agency. Whereas we appreciate about each other that, we're multidimensional, we have a lot of layers, we have strengths, and there's just a lot to people. And that I think it's a struggle, especially for new workers, to just see that clients have a lot more depth and complexity than their one issue. And I think the other thing that we have to think about is that many times the services that are offered are based less on the needs of the clients, because in both of these, really, the services didn't seem to match what the needs were. But it's based on the culture of the agency and the availability of services that organization has. So I know that where I came from, domestic violence was really not addressed until about 10 years ago. Now we have a plethora of services for domestic violence. But before that, they try to plug in these other services that really didn't fit, even though domestic violence was such a huge issue. And I think that as we look at our own agencies and organizations, we have to really stretch in terms of what services are needed that we are not providing, and then we're really not meeting the needs of the clients if we don't do that.
Now, but I have to add a little thing, because I think that's a given. We all have that service issue, and you all have struggled with it for eons. Like you said, 10 years ago with domestic violence, it was a different picture. In this particular case, though I gave you little snippets of it, we didn't have the services. Remember, this is Vietnamese, okay? It took longer to find this lady, okay? The difference is, I know in quarters when I was working as an attorney that this family would have been written off because we couldn't figure out how to help them. And I guess you're saying the same thing. The one-dimensional doesn't work. And that's what the subcultural cultural is. You got to keep peeling away the onions to figure out who the person is, what their needs are, and sometimes it's not throwing services at people. Go ahead.
So you just mentioned something about that this case may have taken a little longer to get to the solution. Can you speak in regards to ASFA, in regards to high caseloads, overloaded, people who do this work, that kind of thing? Because I think that's a big excuse when it comes to making decisions, when it comes to, again, not taking the time to think through those kinds of questions and take the time to really, dig a little deeper. Can you speak to that just a little?
Yeah, it doesn't make any difference. It's an excuse. Because, again, remember my theory, you start at the investigation, drilling down, peeling away the onion, then you have a better chance of meeting the deadlines or determining this child doesn't even need to be removed, right? And if you're in the case and you're in that 24-month thing, who's in charge? Who's in charge? The court. All the feds want is indication that this was discussed, that the plan was revised, and that a specific deadline that is reasonable was given for the next course of action, right? I mean, that's what you all are experiencing. Am I right? Okay. I believe that ASPA requires we do this drilling down, peeling the onion, asking the questions at the first instance. Okay? Now that will, I believe, cure disproportionality once a child is involved with the system. Not how they get in, because I don't even want to begin to touch that. I think that's you guys, okay? But once we get this multi-agency, the court involved, okay, it has to be this questioning process or we're not going to meet the deadlines. But if I'm not meeting the deadlines because I'm asking, again, the reason isn't he's Vietnamese. The reason is I have spent time with the whole team, has worked together to come up with the specific what? Needs of this child or these children and this family. And it's documented. It's documented that we're having trouble finding certain services. But in the meantime, we found something else, and it's helping us with this issue, okay? But until we get domestic violence or mental health or substance abuse resolved, okay, then we can't go to reunification. Did mom ever have substance abuse? No, she did it on her own. She did it. Now, that is not a cultural issue, but doing it on her own may have been. You get my drift? Okay? And some credence has to be given to that if she consistently says, she come to court, I'll do on my own. I'll do on my own. And you know what? For a year and a half, girlfriend was clean. That's how come she was able to move back in the house. But I think we normally would say, no, you got to go and enroll in X, Y, and Z, okay, regardless of who the person is. Because we need the documentation, okay? But what are we supposed to really be doing? And this is the context of the person. We're supposed to be watching their transformation and helping to move them to the right place to be transformed, okay? That's rehabilitation to me. Go ahead.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I think it sounds wonderful. And would wish and hope that we could practice that way. I wonder, it's interesting to hear you say that you believe that ASPA wants us or says to us to ask those questions and to practice that way. It's kind of the same thing with me, but we get so caught up in what the legislation is, what we think it is, our interpretation of it, or the axe falling, or the end result, the bottom line, so to speak, that we sacrifice the quality, I think, of our work. And it's not just us in child welfare. I think those time frames, those timelines drive us, and we're pushed from every area. We know we've got to meet those specifications by federal government, but we also get pushed by it from the courts. We'll have you'll have judges asking and pushing, and that time for everybody is pushing those time frames. Our CASAs, our citizen review boards, foster care review board, everybody out there saying, go.
From my perspective, the time frames say we have to change the way we're doing business. Because
I agree with you.
Because the disproportionality hasn't changed with the time frames. Well, we're still practicing the same way.
That's right.
Okay? Now,
and how do you
I'm not saying every jurisdiction doesn't operate like D.C.
Yeah.
Okay? So I'm not a fool. Okay? Every agency, we've been under receivership since who knows when. We're just coming out of it in mental health, child welfare. We got problems with the Developmental Disabilities Agency. I mean, it's no different. We don't have pots of money. We got a little bit money more than some other people do, but we don't have, okay, everything. Okay? I do believe that if you train people to ask questions, you can get over it. That's all I'm saying. It is not a panacea, okay? Yeah, we got all these mandates. Everybody does. People are pushing at every corner. But see, I only care about Joseph. Okay? Somebody in your agency cares about Joseph, not about the impact of me, but they're trying to do their job. What tools can be given to them to still peel this away, even though we're under such great pressure? I'm not minimizing that.
Oh, no.
I'm not
agreeing
minimizing.
with you. It makes you think and wonder, though, what do you do internally at the management level,
right,
such that you can have the training and supervision that would then generate the type of practice that we're talking about, and also generate conversations with our partners out there, the courts, mental health, et cetera, so that we can get there.
Right. But again, I think it's one kid at a time, one case at a time, which there is a slide that says that. And if you, let's just speak candidly. The educational system is not what it used to be. So you all will tell me about the workers who are coming out with masters who don't know how to think. Okay? I'm putting it out there. All right? Check the box. Okay? That's because, and then that gets fueled, the check the box, because they don't have the critical thinking ability, because that's not taught anymore. And I'm sitting here talking about use methodical questioning. Well, I know that people don't know how to do that, but we got to figure out how to have them do it, okay? Because these children's lives are at stake, okay? And that's what everybody in this room wants to make sure, that ain't no dead kids and no more damage done while we supposedly are serving as their parents, okay? But again, I'm not minimizing. The way I came up with this whole thing about the methodical questioning was because of that lady I told you about. I was just so appalled, okay? Now, this is somebody that didn't know how to read, strung out on heroin, had 2 more babies after I began representing her. The last baby, she was going to lose everything. I went to the hospital, I took her in the car, and I took her up to Philadelphia to Mother Teresa's people. And I said, I know you don't want to be here, and they may kick you. And that nun was calling me every week. No, we can't deal with her. We can't deal with her. She's crazy. She's got to go. You know what happened to her? And this is the questioning, seeing where it is I can touch something that helps that person move forward. She got her 2 girls back. She had an apartment. She was not on heroin. She had full-blown AIDS. She raised her 2 boys that she had after the girls' case came open. And she died in Philadelphia. But her kids were never again involved in child welfare. 5 years. This is somebody, okay, who everybody wrote off. Okay? And that's not something special with me, but I ended up sitting there and saying, okay, I represent her. I can't put her down here. She ain't never going to complain, but I'm responsible for her as her legal representative. And in this work, it means something more. So what do I need to do to figure out how to work with her? And see, I don't think that's what we're doing, okay? And that's where this process comes from. What do I need to do, particularly with people I might not like? Because, I mean, we have to be honest. Sometimes the people are not like us. That's why it's more than race and ethnicity and all of that, okay? We believe we're not like them. Our job is to question so we figure out how we are like them and how we might come up with some approaches that will move them to what? Not necessarily get their kids back, but within, I mean, I could get moms to say, I set the deadlines that ASFA required. I don't care about drug addiction taking 17 years to get rid of. Okay? You've been in rehab how many times, ma'am? Okay? How many times in the last 5 years? Oh, 3. Okay? We're going to give you a chance to do it again. We're coming back in 2.5 months. And you don't have to come to court to do this. Coming back in 2.5 months. Why? Because if you are not successful in rehab, successfully working your rehab, in 2.5 months, I'm changing the goal to adoption. You've had 5 kids already in the system. They're not asking for the whatever expedited TPR. Bottom line is, we don't have time. Okay? And guess what? Some of those people who had never done anything, okay, they did it, and they got their kids back. But it's using the time frames, but then using a way to talk to the person that gathers information that helps you figure out what their unique needs are. And I don't think we generally do that because we're moving too fast. We got so many pressures. Am I making any sense? Okay. All right, let's see. What time is it? 2:30. I have 15 minutes. We have some more examples. Let's talk about, I think I want to do Maria. Okay, Maria is 10. She was born in Mexico. English is her second language. She and her 2 siblings are placed in a foster home where no one speaks English. No one speaks Spanish. They visit their birth mother weekly and attempt to keep up their language skills during those visits. The adoption goal was set 6 months ago at the first permanency hearing. The children were placed in the current foster home just before the goal was changed to adoption. The foster family has indicated an interest in adopting the children, but Maria is not interested. Recently, Maria informed the court that she does not want to remain in the home because the family does not allow the children to speak Spanish. She does not want to leave her siblings. Okay, cultural, subcultural stuff. Language. Immigration status of Maria. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so is the perception that the foster parents won't allow her to speak Spanish?
No, it's real.
It's real.
Yeah. I made this up. This isn't a real case, but
Okay.
yes, it's real.
It's real.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a case plan problem in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the diligent search for the other family members?
That's a good question. But I'm still looking at, I'm not looking at practice. I'm looking at subcultural and cultural context. See, you guys like to just go to, oh, well, we should have done that, and we should have done that.
That's what we used to do.
Yeah, right.
Well, similar to, how I
Joseph?
Joseph. It appears here that she is the oldest child. So again, the culture, based on the culture, what expectations would be there?
And also, I mean, I think we've got a little pattern here, though I didn't intend this when I wrote up Maria, that when you have siblings, is that a subcultural issue for the child? Right? Because the child is not standing alone, right? Okay, let's talk about the cultural, subcultural issues with the foster parents that we don't really know too much about, but you can, we're assuming they're English speaking because they won't allow the kids to speak Spanish.
Do we know the age of the two siblings, the younger ones?
They're younger.
And they may be almost well-intentioned because they want to adopt.
Okay, and I think this is where your comment is perfect because none of what we're talking about is anyone's intention. And I think that's an important thing to put on the table because that's what keeps us from doing this stuff. Okay, somebody's going to misread why I'm asking that question. Okay, that's why how we ask the question becomes important. Okay, that's why walking through and saying these are the subcultural, cultural dynamics that I'm seeing, you might not even be right. But I'm just projecting for myself that this might be an issue, that it's okay to do that. But you're not labeling anybody with anything, okay? And you're not making any assumptions because you put the context issues out there on the table. Go ahead.
What difference would it make in this particular case if we know that the foster family won't allow them to speak Spanish, but what difference would it make in this case plan if, one, the family is Latino and they don't want to because they're trying to assimilate into mainstream culture versus it being a Caucasian family who just won't allow the children to do that?
And that's why there was no race of the foster parent in here because this is what is part of the questioning. Got a problem? What's the genesis of it? Okay? But it also says with foster parents, pre-adoptive parents, which I think, from my experience, oftentimes this stuff doesn't happen there. Some of it's fear of MIPA, which, again, I say is not relevant to this. But let's say it was a Hispanic family who values the whole, every immigrant group does this, the assimilation process. We don't do that here, okay? Or they don't have the language skills anymore, third generation down, okay? All right. Somehow, before it got this far, what? Somebody should have checked it out. Okay? You see what I'm saying? Because now, what do you have? They're good intention. They want to adopt. Okay? All right? Maria, if there was a language issue 6 months ago, social worker could have worked with the foster family or recruited a family that understood Maria's dynamic, okay, even though she's only 10, all right, and adjusted the plan to make sure the right combination was there, okay? That's not going against MIPA, because MIPA says you got to meet the needs of the child. You just can't exclude people because they happen not to be of the same culture. Go ahead.
The other piece in there is that the other piece in there with culture and the language, if I remember correctly, adoption is not a concept it's not accepted in all cultures and all belief systems, and some languages don't even have a word for adoption. So it could very well be not only with this child the separation from her parents, but just a totally foreign concept that someone else that she would lose.
Right.
Mom. I mean, that's, you understand?
Right.
Beyond,
but I think that
beyond emotionally, but
and
just nowhere in her psyche
right.
could she wrap her head around the fact
never
that
seeing mom again.
Exactly.
But see, that's
because
also
that
part of the planning process. That's part of the planning process. If the 10-year-old still needs to have a connection, then we need a family that's going to allow her to have a connection if mom remains appropriate, okay? And it may just be with Maria. It may not be with the other two who are younger and may not have as tight of a relationship with mom. But see, that's where the questioning comes in, okay? Anybody else on this one?
I just make some assumptions about what might happen if we were to make a decision to move Maria to a home that would be Spanish-speaking in your capacity as the judge. What would your reaction be to a plan to move all these children because we want to keep the siblings together?
I mean, that's what we're supposed to do.
Tough decisions, though, when the kids have been there for a period of time.
Well, they haven't been there. These kids have not been there that long. This example is one for me. If they had been there a long time, then let me give you an example. This happened. This is a true story. You all want to hear a true story? I only have about 5 minutes. You don't want to hear a true story? Okay. Picture this. 4-year-old girl has lived with a woman, foster parent, since she was probably 2 weeks old. Okay? The foster parent is from Uganda, but has lived here and raised her kids here. Okay? She's adopted 3 other kids, but I didn't know. I didn't know she had adopted anybody. Because, once that's done, it's done. Which is a problem. We go through the adoption trial, and the foster parent had not shown up. I'd never laid eyes on this woman. Well, I needed to have her testify. Okay? Now, we're getting reports. I'm the neglect judge as well as handling the adoption. So it's not as though I'm not hearing this girl is thriving. Oh, this is a perfect situation. Okay? I inherited the case. I only had it for 6 months, and the first thing was the adoption trial, but I had not seen the foster mother. And the notes from the judge I inherited the case from indicated he'd never seen her either. She'd never come to court. The court orders have who's present. So she'd never been to court. Her attorney comes on the adoption trial day, and he says, I said, where's your client? She did. Most judges don't require them to come. I said, no, most judges, she's got to come. I knew nothing about what I'm about to tell you. Okay? She comes, she testifies. It turns out, in the course of the testimony, I find out she's adopted 3 kids. A year after she adopts 3 kids who are learning disabled and have emotional issues, as many of our children do who have come through the system, they were 8, 9, and 10 when they were adopted. 2 are siblings, 1 is not. They're now 13, 14, and 15. They are in a boarding school in, guess where? Uganda. I don't know. Somebody wrote about it? No, there was some from Nigeria and Tennessee or something. Yeah, it was about the same time that was happening. No, I don't think you heard about this one. Okay. The woman gets on the stand. She testifies. We have a study done by African-American therapist who understands stuff that's happening in Africa, has actually visited some boarding schools there, and he talks about, that this is a viable option. It actually used to be an option in the black community. And I say to the agency, you got to tell me, go to the State Department, ask them to send a visitor to check the place out, see what's happening with the kids. The girl was getting caned every other day. She's ADHD. She's off the hook, okay? Their needs weren't being met in terms of learning because they had, overcrowding that was unbelievable in the classroom. Now, this woman is not a bad person, okay? She went to the agency. She gets adoption subsidy, right? She went to the agency and asked them, is there a problem? This is after the adoption. If I send the kids to Uganda to boarding school. Drilling down. This is post-adoption service. See, we've gone all full circle. Post-adoption services. She was told the legal answer. What's the legal answer? They're your children. You can do whatever you want with them. Okay? All right? Okay? Now, I think if somebody had told her it's not a good idea and explained to her that, I didn't tell you, she didn't go visit them. She didn't write them. She did not call them. She had a cousin who visited with them supposedly on the weekends, but that really wasn't happening, okay? If she had been told that there were issues related to the needs of those kids, maybe she wouldn't have sent them over there. But her testimony was, no, she was adamant. These are her kids. She can send them. Well, would you send a little 4-year-old when she gets to be about 8? Yeah, I don't think the American education system is worth anything. Okay? They get a better education. She might be right. I'm not judging her beliefs and her culture because they do that in Uganda. She said, this is the best education. My children went, and then they went off to college in London. Okay? But these are special ed kids, right? Well, she didn't get the 4-year-old. Okay? The agency didn't support the adoption. But bottom line is, here's what happened. This is my part of it, not your part of it. If I had not insisted on that woman coming to court where I could eyeball her, because we can ask questions too, right? I could eyeball her and ask my peel the onion back questions even when I didn't suspect anything, that little girl would have been adopted. Okay? And in 5 years, she would probably be in boarding school. Okay? Now, she's not. She was moved. Everything's done. Okay? She will not be getting any more foster kids. But this is the importance of it being the whole continuum that we are asking questions, teaching our people how to ask questions. And it's little baby steps at a time. And asking them consistently through the process of getting to those ask for deadlines. And not being afraid if we have good professional reasons from the questions we ask and from the answers that we get to say to the court, these are the facts that make it so we need a little bit more time. Okay? Well, you all have been wonderful. I got to go and get lost going back home. I wish you all the best. If I can ever do anything for anybody, please give me a call. Any questions? Any more questions?